Steve Toneguzzo. How are you this morning, Steve? You still there?
Yes, very well, thank you, Nick.
Great. Have I got you? I always pronounce your name not quite the Italian way. Can you just give it the full... Toneguzzo, Steve Toneguzzo. Now, I've been asked on the text line before we start, someone says, I didn't catch, Steve, from up there's qualifications. Are you a scientist? So I suppose because a lot of people are so concerned about authority, but why, who are you, Steve? And what gives you the qualifications to be talking about 5G in a very scientific way, I must say?
Yes. Okay. So I academically, I have a bachelor in electronic systems engineering, one in computer science, a master's in engineering. I've also been the fellow of a number of a university, Southern Cross Uni. I was an adjunct fellow there, and I have published internationally in universities all over the world. However, I do have to say this, is that whilst I'm an engineer and I understand academia, etc., my background fundamentally is in regulation, government standards, government policy, and risk management. So I am not a medical doctor, I'm not a lawyer, and I certainly will not put myself out to be a radiation expert, but what I am is a risk manager. And fundamentally, this is what we're talking about. And I guess it's a key skill set I have, which is relevant to this, is the ability to know who to reach out to, who are the experts. And so as the chair of Environment and Community Safe from Radiation, we have developed an international network of those experts that we need: medical doctors, medical scientists, researchers, lawyers, etc. So they're all on tap. Dial a friend, as they say.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have a lot, and I've been talking to you for a couple of years now and had you here on this show at least twice before about this issue. And let's clear a couple of things out of the way, because you mentioned your organisation, of which you are the chair, Environment and Community Safe from Radiation, ECSFR.com.au. Has a very substantial website if you haven't seen it, folks. Got a lot of the stuff up there, particularly about the regulations, as Steve is saying, regarding the organisation called ARPANSA. We'll probably get to that very shortly. But I just wanted to, because you pointed to attention this week to me to a couple of things, and one of them being the program on the feed the other night, which looked at 1 in 8 Australians who thinking COVID-19 is caused by 5G mobile technology, and various other, one would say, conspiracy theories or sort of slightly out there ideas. Now, this show is actually filmed mostly in Mullumbimby. For those of you who haven't seen it, you can go to SBS On Demand and check it out. It's available now. I didn't get to watch it all, but you've got a couple of responses to that, first of all, because you're not of the same ilk, you could say, as some of the anti-5G or the 5G protesters who are doing the very outward, streetwise stuff in our region. So what's your position?
Yeah, certainly. Well, one of the things about conspiracy theories is they're not founded or backed up with data or evidence, shall we say, and credible independent evidence. So first of all, I will say that ECSFR do not believe that 5G, is the cause of COVID. We certainly put that in the conspiracy theory basket. Yeah. I will say, though, with SBS, I do have to give them credit. In my view, they were probably the first mainstream media organisation on the planet to actually do a balanced review. And I really do recommend that people do watch that, because they, whilst they did mention, they threw out there the conspiracy theory, the emphasis of the show was really on raising issues that have never been raised in mainstream media before. For example, like bringing to attention that the WHO has classified this radio frequency as a possible carcinogen. Yeah,
that's the World Health World Health Organisation, the WHO.
Yeah, the World Health Organisation. Yeah, so SBS I thought were quite balanced. They interviewed what is considered a chap by the name of Dr. Rodney Croft, who is considered to be Australia's leading expert in the field, and he's funded by the government and does a lot with industry. And what he had to tell us were some quite interesting things, like, for example, yes, 5G will heat your skin, but don't worry about that. It's only a little bit. And another takeaway I got was, oh, yes, look, the frequency is the same as a microwave oven for your mobile phones, but it's a lot less power, so don't worry about that. And another thing, which I consider to be an admission that he made was he said, you know, he admitted, he goes, well, no, you know, of course there's not a lot of research into 5G, but to consider the research to say that 5G is safe or unsafe, you know, that would be unscientific. Now, it's astounding to hear a scientist say that the lack of research is not a reason to call something unsafe. So, you know, but he was put forward as Australia's expert. So that, I think, was, you know, it was a very balanced show by SBS. And I think it for those people that are awake, they would have seen this and they would have started to question. And one of the members of the Stop 5G, or rather the Safe Technology Northern Rivers, Tashi, who was interviewed on SBS, you know, she made a very good point. She said, look, don't trust me.
Yeah, no,
just do your own credible
She said that a few
research.
times, which was very good. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and why will the government not tell us and give us the proof that this is safe? You know, I mean, I think that's a reasonable question to ask. If you're telling us this is safe, show us the scientific research and the evidence that says it is safe.
Well, of course, we haven't done this in the past, and you point to in one of your pieces, one of your letters here, the assurances of safety that went back to a landmark case against the Tobacco Institute of Australia by AFCO regarding deceptive and misleading conduct. Just to say, oh, don't be worried about that, or this, you know, it's really not satisfying the precautionary principle at all, is it? You just, you know, and we've had so many instances of this. People forget. Thalidomide is another one in terms of science. This is a great drug for this. Look at it. Tobacco is perfectly okay. You've seen the advertising in the 40s and 50s of pregnant women and doctors smoking cigarettes. It's ridiculous. So I'm not making a direct equivalence here, but we have a history, haven't we, of new technologies or new products coming onto the market with some sort of dubious question going on about them, but somehow sort of, oh, she'll be right, mate, flushing through, getting through, and then 20, 30, 50 years later, we see the effects, and certainly that's true of tobacco. So, you know,
if I may, Nick, just on that point, I mean, a brilliant movie that's worth watching is that movie Thank You for Smoking. It sort of, you know, it outs a lot of the strategies that are used by both tobacco and the telecommunications industry. And in fact, the movie ends with the guy leaving his PR firm for tobacco and starting his own PR firm, working for the wireless industry, and it ends by saying to the board members of a number of telecommunications companies, look, repeat after me. Although we are continuing to do the research, there is no evidence linking cell phone use to brain cancer. And I think that movie is a must-watch.
Now, look, another piece that you pointed me to is another angle here, and that's a piece that was in ABC News a couple of days ago, or a week ago, on the 12th of June, and it's entitled ASIO Briefing Warns that the far right is exploiting coronavirus to recruit new members. I just wonder why because this is not a direct 5G thing, but it does bring up some other issues, doesn't it? Do you see that the 5G questions, the anti-5G movement has this kind of susceptibility to these kind of individuals and activists? Is that what you're saying here?
Yeah, it's a good point, Nick. So the issue is that it's all over the world, and I'll just focus on Australia though. But you know, people are not as stupid as the government, I think, believes that they are. And you know, with the internet, with research, people are waking up, and they can see that something is wrong, particularly around assurances around 5G. There's something wrong there. And so you know, there are hundreds. I would put the number at well over 250,000 Australians in various groups around the country who have self-formed grassroots, you know, movement to you know, to exchange their views and things around the concerns they have with 5G. Now, having said that, that provides a perfect opportunity for a radical or extremist organisation to actually leverage off that, you know, by infiltrating groups, by getting out shall we say, a conspiracy or an extremist message. And I think there is a concern there. And I think, you know, I think that that article where ASIO provided some information to the ABC was extremely valid. You know, in the sense that the people who are forming groups and who are, you know, genuinely concerned about genuine issues and are coming from a place of, shall we say, love and peace, should be very mindful of, you know, of not getting infiltrated and not being led down the wrong path.
Well, it is a common strategy now, and without getting into any rave about it, because it's very complex. Of course, the current Black Lives Matter response to the killings in America, and of course in this country to the terrible treatment of Indigenous people still in this time, is also subject to this kind of insurrection at times, and people with not peaceful and not a certain kind of balanced view, or trying to get across a balanced view, are sort of usurped by sometimes aggressive forces, which are then, of course, focused on too much by the media, and we get a distorted view of actually what's going on.
Oh, look, well said, Nick, and let's look at the facts here. I come back to, you've got to say to yourself, why has the truth, or rather the alternate view about 5G been what I would call the most censored topic in the media of our time? So you say, well, the media agenda largely is very much, controlled, and with the exception of yourself, and perhaps, certainly I have faith in the feed now, and maybe, and ABC. There's a few independents out there that are still going strong, but the majority of the media do actually suppress this. And so, yes, if there's a 5G protest or there's a protest going on, it's very easy to plant a few disruptors in the crowd, and that is what the media will focus on, and that is what the media will portray to the rest of the population as being the people behind this movement. That they're angry, they're disruptive, they're dangerous. As we've heard so many times in the Murdoch press, the people in Mullumbimby are all tinfoil hatters, and they're all nut jobs. And I think that again, I come back to that the feed, the SBS feed. It demonstrated that the people in Mullumbimby are actually articulate, intelligent, well-informed, educated people, and good on them for doing that.
Indeed. That itself is probably a little bit disruptive to some people out there in the world who think that Mullum and Byron, the Rainbow region, are a bunch of New Age quacks, because actually it's usually most of the people involved in actions here of all sorts are highly educated, highly articulate people, pretty much to a person. So it's good. It's a disruptive influence when you see these people speaking on relatively mainstream media, like even like SBS. And look, turning to 5G, the letter that you sent to me recently, amongst a lot of other things here, you're talking about the precautionary approach, which is what you're interested in particular. And you say that the trigger for a precautionary approach to 5G has demonstrably been met. With 5G, you say the wireless industry reports suggest that they will become the nation's biggest consumer and polluter, negating all climate emissions targets. How do they justify the climate risk to shareholders? That's the first question. And what if the mysterious increase in blood cancers, and this is interesting, and many other diseases are indeed RF-related, radio frequency related? The Commonwealth estimates that blood cancer alone will cost the economy $500 billion over the next 10 years. Is it in the public interest, or isn't it in the public interest, to understand and manage risk, or to intentionally ignore and obfuscate risk? I mean, are you saying here that they in some way or other, they know that there may be problems, that these problems may cost a fortune in terms of healthcare in Australia, and yet somehow they're just turning a blind eye? Is it that serious? You think that's actually what's going on?
Absolutely, absolutely, I do. So let's look at. Let's start with, and again, I'm going to back everything I say up with facts that people can research themselves. If you Google Parliamentary Inquiry into 5G, you will find this is an inquiry that recently concluded and very, again, suppressed by the media.
Yes.
You will find over 500 submissions, which is very unusual for a parliamentary inquiry to get that many. Many have come from, like, the City of Melbourne, the City of Sydney, Australia's peak water body, main roads, West Australia, Queensland, health. They all of these, or 95% of the submissions raise a risk in some manner or form around 5G. Okay. 5% of the submissions are from industry and the government regulators that say it's perfectly safe and it's fine. Now let's just come, and at the recommendations of the report we can probably talk to later, but coming back to, so this is the thing, right? So, and a major body of evidence was provided to the government around the health concerns. The statement you made about the $500 billion, that is a government number. That's not us. That's the federal government.
Estimated blood cancers alone 500 billion over the next 10 years.
500 billion, yes, that's correct. That will cost the economy. They haven't mentioned the massive human suffering, of course, and the toll emotionally.
Yeah.
But let's look at that for a minute. Now, when they made the announcement that that's what it's going to cost, did they say that they were going to put money into researching the cause and the NHMRC? And I'll get back to, if you wish, how the NHMRC is linked into industry and everything later. But
so the NHMRC, just what is the NHMRC?
The NHMRC is a federal government body that sits under the Secretary of Health, Professor Brendan Murphy,
Yes.
also the BMO at the moment. But the NHMRC is a federal government body that allocates funds to health research. Okay, now some of those funds actually come from industry, but that's, I'll just park that for the moment.
So that's a National Health and Medical Research Council, yeah?
Correct. Yes, correct. Thank you, Nick. Yes, it is. Now, when the government made this announcement about the 500 billion, they did not say that they were going to put money into researching the cause. They said they were going to put money into researching essentially pharmaceutical solutions. So if you have a problem that's costing the economy that much, wouldn't you want to know the cause unless you already know it? And what we have is military documents that are declassified, of course, where our Veterans Affairs have stated very clearly that one of the causes of leukemia, and is a basis for which veterans can claim compensation, is exposure to non-ionizing radiation. Right.
Which in the military, I guess, is even more common, I guess, because of much of the technology that they use in the field.
Correct, radar. I mean, the exposures are a lot higher, and in some cases, the power levels are also
through the roof,
far higher. So I'm not going to say that because of those military findings that means that everyone out there is using or exposed to wireless radiation is going to is at risk.
No, well, that's the thing, isn't it? Everybody's risk is different, yeah.
So Dr. Bruce Hocking, who was a former medical officer of Telstra years ago, of course, when I say former, he was dismissed or stood down because he issued a report that said that identified clusters of leukemia in children around broadcast towers. Right, and that's publicly available, that report. It was referenced in the 2001 Senate inquiry. So Nick, I suppose I could go on and on, but to answer your question, yes, I do believe the government know the cause. Yes, I believe it is being covered up. I believe it is being covered up by a small, shall we say, cartel who are very influential in the government and in the control of what money goes where, what messages are put out, etc. So this is on one hand, it's like smoking. It's very profitable for the industry and the shareholders of that industry, but it's not so, shall we say, profitable or necessarily in the national interest. Yeah. And I'll just conclude by saying that the Parliamentary Inquiry into 5G, I just want to really stress that health was not the only issue. You mentioned the power consumption and the carbon footprint.
Yes.
So yes, I mean, the industry themselves, there's a report, I think, from Huawei, there's also reports from Ericsson and various other companies that where they state, I think the Huawei one states that the wireless industry by 2025 could consume up to 51% of the world's power. Right?
Wow.
And how is this supposed to be an environmentally friendly solution? Now, because when you think
that's worse than Bitcoin mining.
Oh, look, it's worse. Absolutely. I mean, if you're microwaving you push the button on your microwave oven, and of course it's going to draw power. You push the button on the 20-odd thousand towers that are in this country, let alone around the world. And of course, if you're going to microwave the environment, it is going to consume power. And then you add billions of devices, mobile phones and Internet of Things.
All talking to each other.
Correct. All talking to each other, all needing power. And you add the data centers onto that, we are talking about a massive carbon footprint.
Yeah. Now, as you mentioned there, the National Health and Medical Research Council, and you mentioned also the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Brendan Murphy, and you've recently sent him an open letter request for further particulars. You start by saying, and you often write to Dr. Murphy, and very professional statements that you make here, very hard to ignore, and yet So you said, "Dear Dr. Murphy, on 15th of April 2020, we wrote to you via email to express our grave and general concerns regarding your public statements about 5G, which were these. This is the Chief Medical Officer saying these things now. I'd like to reassure the community that 5G technology is safe," said Brendan Murphy. "The radio waves to which the general public is exposed from telecommunications are not hazardous to human health. And lastly, there is no evidence to telecommunication technologies such as 5G cause adverse health impact." Well, they're very clear denial statements, aren't they? I mean, how's he situated himself by saying that for the future? If the truth about 5G, whatever that truth actually is, if there are serious health hazards that emerge over time because we have this stuff installed, by someone like Brendan Murphy, he's in a very vulnerable position, isn't he? And the government itself, or are they? I wonder.
Well, depends what sort of friends you have.
Yeah, right. Well, that's right. That's the thing, isn't it?
Control the narrative.
Yeah.
But let's so yes, on the ECSFR.com.au website, we have a couple of letters to Professor Brendan Murphy. The first one is providing. We quote the same people he relies on, the WHO, APANSA, WHO World Health Organisation, APANSA, Australia's Radiation Protection Authority. We quote them, and we point out that his statements, which you just read, a reasonable person might consider to be extremely misleading. Not only that, but in his capacity as a medical doctor offering medical advice to the nation, that then adds the further gravity to his statements. Now, how can he? So if something is safe, it is by definition it does not carry risk. Now, APANSA have admitted that there is risk. Okay, on their website, APANSA actually recommend. They don't suggest. They recommend that parents reduce a child's exposure to, I think it's in the case of, I think they specifically say mobile phone radiation. Okay, so why would you make that recommendation if you weren't concerned if there was no risk? By the way, the media and the phone companies don't communicate that message. It's buried in the PANSA website, and so on and so on and so forth. So we quote. The other thing too to note is that Professor Murphy is actually he's involved in the WHO. He's the Australian member on the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, the same IARC that classified electromagnetic radio or radio frequency wireless radiation as a possible carcinogen. So a reasonable person would consider a possible carcinogen as hazardous, would they not? And yet here we have the same chap that sits on this board assuring the Australian public it's not hazardous, it's safe. I mean, there's some questions here. Professor Murphy is also on the board of the NHMRC, by the way.
Yes, the National Health and Medical Research Council. Now, Steve Toneguzzo, we're talking to him nearly out of time, Steve. We'll get you back, no doubt, because you're always good value and there's so much to say here. But I just want to get clear, because you're talking about our PANSA there. That's the body that governs the radio frequencies in Australia. But our PANSA, and you said that they said that there is health, and they're recommending that you minimise exposure to your children to cell phones, in particular radiation. However, their own, just to get clear on this, because many people talk about this, our PANSA's own way of measuring is ancient. Ancient is a big word, but it's very old, isn't it? Like, it's nowhere near up to date the regulatory parameters that they apply.
Well, the PANSA have admitted in writing that they don't have the ability to measure 5G.
Oh, okay.
Right, that's the first thing. But with coming back to the Wi-Fi and mobile phones, etc., you're absolutely right. The whole standard is based on what's called a thermal level. E.g., think of a microwave oven. If you don't get hot, then it must be good for you.
So, but a little bit of burning's okay.
A little bit's okay, but as long as that's right.
Jeez. Yeah. Look, Steve Toneguzzo, we're going to have to leave it there today, but I'll get you back for sure, and hopefully live in the studio we can do a bit more live to air. Steve's the chairman of the Environment and Community Safe from Radiation, ECSFR.com.au. Check out the website. Steve, just for last, anything, because I know you have a lot more to say, and we can't do it today, but anything that you'd like to finish with that you felt like you need to say today?
Yes, I would. I would like to just say to parents that at the very least, when you don't need the Wi-Fi, please turn it off in the home. When your child doesn't need the mobile phone, please turn it off. Just do what you can as a first step to minimise exposure, particularly to your children.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Steve. We will talk to you very soon here on BayFm, and you're the first guest that I've had on my show for weeks, so it's exciting.
I'm honoured.
Talk to you really soon. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.